Welcome to Code Breakers. I am Donna Clement Petrushka, daughter of Kim Clement. I want to welcome you to an extra special Code Breakers today as we delve into what has recently happened with the United States leaving the United Nations Human Rights Council and what my father prophesied about it. Afterwards, my mother, Jane Clement, will join us to give us her insights and a biblical perspective on what she sees. So get ready to decode with me today, because I see trouble brewing for the UN. And as more and more corruption is exposed, I believe that we are seeing the beginning of the fulfillment of what my father, Kim Clement, saw and prophesied over and over again. After that, we will have the honor of hearing what my mother, Jane Clement, has to say. Before going into the news, I'd like to share with you some footage of my father that I was looking at last year when I put up an old video of him from back in 2005 on my YouTube channel. I specifically noticed that he fervently prophesied that the UN was a stench to God's nostrils because of corruption, that a Judas had been housed, betrayal. It wasn't long after that prophecy that he began to actually go to Israel. And from then on, and for the rest of his life, he prophesied over Israel, went there many, many times, not only to visit, but to stand on the soil and declare the word of the Lord, as well as bless Israel. He even created an Israel partnership program to support Israel and stand with them in this time in history. In the clip I'm about to play for you, I've included my father's last trip to Geneva, Switzerland in 2015, not long before he fell ill. God told him to put his boots on the ground in Geneva, where the main headquarters for the United Nations is. And I want you to hear what he had to say as he stood there in Geneva, and then notice how he remembered the very prophecy from 2005 that I had put up on my YouTube channel. At the time I shared this on The Den, I knew that God had shown me these two specific dates to share with all of you for a reason. And as recent weeks have shown, more and more of this is coming to pass. So let's see two of the most important things that God was showing my father about the UN over the span of a decade, both in 2005 and 2015.
Do you realize I'm standing here and I'm already feeling and sensing prophetic things? I am taken back to Nashville, Tennessee, when I was on the stage, on the TBN stage, and I began, we were just flowing in the Spirit and we were moving, and I began to pick up on the United Nations.
I will move to South America. I will move in Italy. I will move in France when they repent for the disgusting thing that they have done. For God says in the United Nations, I will pinpoint Russia and I will pinpoint France, and I will pull their pants down and show them the nakedness to the world, for they have played with this nation. They have played with this nation, and they have said, we will bring to shame this nation. But God said, now I will shake the United Nations, and God says, I will abolish it. I will abolish it, for it has done nothing but steal and bring corruption into this nation. The United Nations has housed Judas, and now I have taken Judas out, and I'm revealing the lie. I shall abolish the United Nations. But God says the only thing that I shall keep is the refugee economy. In other words, I'm going to take care of the refugees. I'm going to take care of nations financially. That and another one shall also exist, but there shall be no more United Nations. I will raise up a spiritual force that will take care of it. And you know what that force is? It's my church, because my church is supposed to bring unity. My church is supposed to bring finances, and the economy is going to change, because I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, says the Lord. Come on, hallelujah.
I was there and I was going and I was prophesying and I was talking about, and a stench came to my nostril. I mean that. I smelled something bad, and it was a literal smell. And that's when I saw the United Nations and how God was so, the way he spoke, he was disgusted with what was going on there. That was then. Can you imagine now? Do you really think this will carry on? This cannot carry on. And so I now, as I'm standing here, like Greg was saying, there's no time or space. I was taken back to that prophecy. And the Lord said, I want to remind you of what you said there, that it will come to nothing. It will be, the corruption will be seen. Maybe when we standing here today in Geneva, maybe there will be an exposure of some of the corruption that's going on. An exposure, because God does not take lightly this kind of deception, and it's got worse. So that prophecy suddenly came to me now, and God said it's going to unfold in the next few months. So, I'm already sensing that now. And so we have so much that we can take and use. We have a word that we use to wage war against this demonic power. We have a word. We don't only have one word, we have many words. That's how we pray. We don't just come praying saying, oh Lord, will you please bless Geneva, and will you bless the people, and all this stuff. We come here with a word, and we say the most powerful words you could ever say to God. But you said. And when you say that to him, you're reminding him of what he spoke then. Well, what happened was, I didn't remind him now. He reminded me. And he said, this could be that time. Because they're touching Israel. They're touching something that is in my heart, deep inside my heart. And so, the words that he said, he said, it's clean, the streets are clean, all that stuff. And then he said, it's a state of corruption. And I've spoken before, and that's what he was just talking about now in Nashville, and spoke of the corruption of the United Nations. The Spirit of God said, hear me regarding that what they are doing, it shall come to nothing. So what's happening now is he's already said it. So then you may be saying, well, what are you doing here then if he's already said it before you got here? Now, he said it when I was here in the Spirit, while I was still standing in Los Angeles, standing in California. It's necessary for me to align myself with it so that I can speak it, say it. When God told a prophet to lie on his side for so many years or days at least, you do realize that when he did that, the guy was actually just lying there. You realize that sometimes it takes a physical presence to bring something to pass. And you can see it throughout the scriptures that he sends men to certain geographic regions. We are here for that.
As you can see, God was revealing to us that not only is there corruption and betrayal in the UN, but that it will come to nothing, and the UN will eventually be abolished. Now, I want to go further back in time to Seattle, Washington in 2009, one of the most powerful nights where my father was overwhelmed with how much he was seeing. On this specific night, he saw the uniting of the Koreas, and then, once again, he saw the corruption in the UN. I see these extremely significant events coinciding before our eyes, and the fact that we're beginning to see what appears to be the beginning of North and South Korea uniting, we will also see more and more of the corruption in the UN exposed and how God plans to deal with it.
America shall look and say, what is this happening? We thought we could make peace through United Nations. Hey, what is the United Nation? It is an evil force, says the Lord, that is a stench to my nostrils. They are not what I have called. God said, my church shall arise and invade the kingdoms of this world, and the kingdoms of this world shall become the kingdoms of our God and his Christ, says the Lord.
It was on that very day that my father had a vision of Christ in a mantle. And from that day on, and for the rest of his life, he wore a mantle over his right shoulder. This shows me the importance of the things he prophesied that night. He actually prophesied about the corruption in the UN many, many times. So now I would like to show you what has been going on in the United Nations Human Rights Council, and specifically the unfair treatment of Israel. I have some footage from the UN Watch, which is a non-governmental organization based in Geneva, Switzerland, whose mandate is to monitor the performance of the United Nations by the yardstick of its own charter. United Nations Watch was established in 1993 by legendary civil rights activist Morris B. Abram, the former U.S. permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva. Hillel Neuer is currently the executive director of the UN Watch, and I want you to hear what he says about the corruption he has witnessed while attending the meetings of the United Nations Human Rights Council. In this clip, at a meeting of this council, he questions whether the UN is upholding its original mission.
The UN's raison d'être is the protection of peace, rights, justice, and social progress. And so today we ask, is the UN upholding this noble mission? when the Islamic Republic of Iran, which arrests brave Iranian women for the crime of not wearing a hijab, is elected to the board of UN Women, the entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, is the UN upholding its mission? When in the space of only 1 year, Saudi Arabia is rewarded for its subjugation of women with a seat on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, then on the Executive Board of UN Women, and just now on the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, is the UN upholding its mission? When President Erdogan's Turkey, which persecutes human rights activists and throws journalists in prison, is elected to the Committee on NGOs, the body that oversees the UN activities of human rights groups worldwide, is the UN upholding its mission? When the co-founder of the Muammar Gaddafi Human Rights Prize and his sponsor Cuba are elected repeatedly to this Human Rights Council, is the UN upholding its mission? And as we speak, in this very building, when genocidal Syria holds the gavel as president of the UN-backed Conference of Disarmament, is the UN upholding its founding mission? No, Mr. President. Allowing Syria to chair the body that produced the Chemical Weapons Convention, even as Assad gasses his own people, is like putting a serial rapist in charge of a women's shelter.
That was from June 21st of this year, 2018. Now watch this clip from last year that I've played for you before of Hillel questioning the council on why they would single out Israel in a very unfair targeting of the Jewish state as an apartheid state.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs, whatever challenges they face, enjoy full rights to vote and to be elected in the Knesset. They work as doctors and lawyers. They serve on the Supreme Court. Now, I'd like to ask the members of that commissioned that report, the Arab states from which we just heard, Egypt, Iraq, and the others, how many Jews live in your countries? How many Jews lived in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco? Once upon a time, the Middle East was full of Jews. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. Algeria, where are your Jews? Egypt used to have 75,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Syria, you had tens of thousands of Jews. Where are your Jews? Iraq, you had over 135,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Mr. President, where is the real apartheid? Why is there a UN commission on the Middle East that does not include Israel? From the 1960s and the 70s, they refused to include Israel. Where is the apartheid, Mr. President? Mr. President, why are we meeting today on an agenda item singling out only one state, the Jewish state, for targeting? Where is the apartheid, Mr. President?
Now I want to show you Nikki Haley, who is the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, exposing the corruption in the Human Rights Council on May 18th, 2018, the very day my father prophesied about regarding our recent trip to Israel and the importance of our team being boots on the ground there. I believe that what he was seeing was even more than the United States' decision to move our embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing it as the eternal capital of Israel. I see another connection here, as Nikki Haley called out the UN Human Rights Council on its corruption as she questioned their support of Hamas, which is outrageous and unfair to the people of Israel and even the people of Gaza who are controlled by this terrorist organization. This news clip I'm about to play you is from TV7 Israel News and includes Netanyahu's response to the rocket attacks that our own team witnessed when we were in Israel this past May.
Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcasting to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, the United Nations Security Council fails to condemn Hamas for its rocket fire toward Israel as the body's Arab representative, Kuwait, declares the Palestinians have a right to fight the Jewish state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatens the Islamist organizations in the Gaza Strip that if they continue to test Israel, they will pay a heavy price. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has asserted once again that non-Syrian forces, including Iran and its Shiite proxies in Syria, had to leave the southern part of the war-torn country adjacent to the border with Israel and Jordan with the utmost haste. An informal ceasefire took hold yesterday after close to 22 hours of mortar shell and rocket fire out of the Gaza Strip toward Israel's southern communities and IDF retaliation strikes on militant installations belonging to the Islamist Hamas and Islamic Jihad across the Palestinian enclave. The massive barrage of rockets and mortar shells that were fired by the Iranian-backed Islamic Jihad and its Gaza ruling ally, the Islamist Hamas organization, led the United States to call for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, during which Washington's Ambassador Nikki Haley condemned Hamas's heinous acts as proving an apparent truth. Hamas's stated purpose is the destruction of the State of Israel.
First, this outrageous terrorist attack proves what we have consistently maintained, namely, that Hamas's stated purpose is the destruction of Israel. That is its purpose when it fires rockets into Israel. That is its purpose when it builds terror tunnels underneath Israeli territory. And that is its purpose when it orchestrates violent protests and riots at the boundary fence, calling for a march for return. All of these acts are indivisible parts of a single strategy. That strategy is to do as much damage as possible to Israel and to provoke a response in self-defense that will create international condemnation of Israeli actions.
While the United Kingdom and France joined the United States in condemning the internationally recognized terror group Hamas, a statement demanding an official condemnation of the Islamist organization's rocket fire toward Israel was blocked by the Council's Arab representative, Kuwait, a temporary member of the powerful body which praised Hamas for its ongoing battle against the Jewish state. Kuwait's ambassador to the UN, Mansour al-Utaibi, emphasized to the other members of the Security Council that his country fully supports the Palestinians, who he asserted have a legitimate right to fight Israel and to defend their aspirations and dreams to independence for as long as the occupation of what al-Utaibi defined as Muslim lands continues. In response to Kuwait's decision to block the condemning statement, Ambassador Haley described the UN body as disconnected while calling its failure to adopt the statement outrageous.
The United States called this meeting today to talk about the dangerous and destructive activities of the terrorist organization Hamas in the Gaza Strip. You might think that the rest of the Security Council would join us in condemning a terrorist organization like Hamas. There shouldn't be any debate about this. But of course, because this attack involves Israel, the standard is different. The United States drafted a Security Council statement that would have condemned Hamas for launching rockets and endangering civilians. This should have been a no-brainer. You would think no one would want to side with Hamas when it comes to condemning rocket launches. But the statement was blocked. We called for a meeting under the agenda item, Threats to International Peace and Security Caused by Terrorist Acts. But again, we were blocked. Apparently, some council members did not think Hamas launching rockets qualified as terrorism. The United States begs to differ.
Meanwhile, after the IDF spokesperson's unit summarized the latest round of violence between Israel and the Islamist organizations of the Palestinian enclave, in which approximately 100 rockets and mortars were fired toward the Jewish state, 40 of which were intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-rocket defense system, while the rest fell in open territory and inside communities, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared Israel's resolve to defend itself by all means necessary. During a memorial ceremony for victims of the 1948 Al-Talena affair, Netanyahu threatened the Islamist organizations in Gaza that if they continue to test Israel, they will pay a heavy price.
מאז אתמול צה"ל מגיב בעוצמה על הירי מרצועת עזה, בתקיפה של עשרות מטרות של גורמי הטרור, במכה הקשה ביותר שהתחדנו עליהם מזה שנים. מי שאחראים להסלמה בהשראת איראן הם שלטון החמאס, הג'יהאד האסלאמי וארגוני הטרור האחרים. אינני מפרט את תוכניותינו, משום שאינני רוצה שהאויב ידע מה צפוי לו.
Here's another clip of Nikki Haley confronting the United Nations Human Rights Council as she points out how politics has corrupted the UN.
Good afternoon. There are many terrible things happening in the world today, many things that demand our urgent attention. As we speak, protests are taking place in Nicaragua. Over 146 peaceful Nicaraguans have been killed by their own government in the past 2 months. But we're not talking about Nicaragua today. The people of Iran have been protesting their government for months. Thousands of peaceful Iranian protesters have been arrested. Over 25 are dead. But we're not talking about Iran either. The world's worst humanitarian crisis is going on right now in Yemen. Millions are at risk for starvation. In Burma, almost 1 million innocent people have been driven from their homes in a campaign of ethnic cleansing. But we're not talking about Yemen or Burma. Instead, today, the General Assembly is devoting its valuable time to the situation in Gaza. Gaza is an important international matter. But what makes it different and more urgent than conflicts in Nicaragua, Iran, Yemen, Burma, or many other desperate places? Because we haven't gathered here to discuss any of those urgent issues. The United States would welcome that. What makes Gaza different for some is that attacking Israel is their favorite political sport. That's why we're here today. The nature of this resolution clearly demonstrates that politics is driving the day. It is totally one-sided. It makes not one mention of Hamas, who routinely initiates violence in Gaza. Such one-sided resolutions at the UN do nothing to advance peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Everyone recognizes that. But advancing peace is not the goal of this resolution. I suspect even my Turkish friends know the passage of this resolution won't change anything, but that it looks good for the people back home to think they're doing something.
It may seem absurd that the Human Rights Council would seemingly support the terrorist organization Hamas over Israel, but this is exactly the stench to God's nostrils that my father saw. The next clip I want to show you is of Musab Hassan Youssef. He is the son of one of the founding members of Hamas, who literally had a Damascus Road conversion to Christianity, just as my father repeatedly prophesied. The prophecy that comes to my mind is from September 6, 2014, where my dad said, "A move of the Holy Spirit that will creep over into the streets of the Middle East, and there will be Damascus Road conversions take place in the highest places in terrorist organizations." In the clip I'm about to show you, Musab Hassan Youssef, better known as the son of Hamas, confronts the United Nations Human Rights Council and specifically the representative of Palestine on their use of Israel as an excuse for their own misdeeds. This is a powerful moment and another connection in the glimpses of the future my father saw over the years that are coming together like pieces of a puzzle and revealing the big picture we're beginning to see. Here is a former member of Hamas who had a Damascus Road conversion to Christianity, defending Israel and exposing more of the corruption in the UN.
Shukran, Sayyid Rais. I take the floor on behalf of the UN Watch. My name is Musab Hassan Youssef. I grew up in Ramallah as a member of Hamas. I address the words to the Palestinian Authority, which claims to be the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. I ask, where does your legitimacy come from? The Palestinian people did not elect you, and they did not appoint you to represent them. You are self-appointed. Your accountability is not to your own people. This is evidenced by your own total violation for their human rights. In fact, the Palestinian individual and their human development is the least of your concerns. You kidnap Palestinian students from campus and torture them in your jails. You torture your political rivals. The suffering of the Palestinian people is the outcome of your selfish political interest. You are the greatest enemy of the Palestinian people. If Israel did not exist, you would have no one to blame. Take responsibility for the outcome of your own actions. You fan the flames of conflict to maintain your abusive power. Finally, you use this platform to mislead the international community, to mislead the Palestinian society, to believe that Israel is responsible for the problem you create. Thank you.
As we have seen this year, it appears that the Koreas will be uniting as my father prophesied. We have seen more and more corruption in the UN, especially regarding Israel, and we have seen an example of a Damascus Road conversion. As all of my father's prophecies are beginning to become clearer and more connected, we see what God is doing in the United States of America and Israel at the same time, as my father prophesied on February 22, 2014. The United States has announced that it will be withdrawing from the United Nations Human Rights Council, specifically pointing out the unfair treatment of Israel.
Good afternoon. The Trump administration is committed to protecting and promoting the God-given dignity and freedom of every human being. Every individual has rights that are inherent and inviolable. They're given by God and not by government. Because of that, no government must take them away. For decades, the United States has led global efforts to promote human rights, often through multilateral institutions. While we have seen improvements in certain human rights situations, for far too long we have waited while that progress comes too slowly, or in some cases, never comes. Too many commitments have gone unfulfilled. President Trump wants to move the ball forward. From day one, he has called out institutions or countries who say one thing and do another. And that's precisely the problem at the Human Rights Council. As President Trump said at the UN General Assembly, it is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the Human Rights Council. We have no doubt that there was once a noble vision for this council. But today we need to be honest. The Human Rights Council is a poor defender of human rights. Worse than that, the Human Rights Council has become an exercise in shameless hypocrisy, with many of the world's worst human rights abuses going ignored, and some of the world's most serious offenders sitting on the council itself. The only thing worse than a council that does almost nothing to protect human rights is a council that covers for human rights abuses and is therefore an obstacle to progress and an impediment to change. The Human Rights Council enables abuses by absolving wrongdoers through silence and falsely condemning those who have committed no offense. A mere look around the world today demonstrates that the Council has failed in its stated objectives. Its membership includes authoritarian governments with unambiguous and abhorrent human rights records, such as China, Cuba, and Venezuela. There is no fair or competitive election process, and countries have colluded with one another to undermine the current method of selecting members. And the Council's continued and well-documented bias against Israel is unconscionable. Since its creation, the Council has adopted more resolutions condemning Israel than against the rest of the world combined. The United States has no opposition in principle to multilateral bodies working to protect human rights. We desire to work with our allies and partners on this critical objective that reflects America's commitment to freedom. But when organizations undermine our national interests and our allies, we will not be complicit. When they seek to infringe on our national sovereignty, we will not be silent. The United States, which leads the world in humanitarian assistance, and whose service members have sacrificed life and limb to free millions from oppression and tyranny, will not take lectures from hypocritical bodies and institutions as America selflessly give their blood and treasure to help the defenseless. Ambassador Haley has spent more than a year trying to reform the Human Rights Council. She is the right leader to drive our efforts in this regard at the United Nations. Her efforts in this regard have been tireless. She has asserted American leadership on everything from the Assad regime's chemical weapons use to the pressure campaign against North Korea and the Iran-backed provocations in the Middle East. Ambassador Haley has been fearless and a consistent voice on behalf of our ally Israel, and she has a sincere passion to protect the security, dignity, and the freedom of human beings around the world, all while putting American interests first. She has been a fierce defender of human rights around the world. I will now turn it over to Ambassador Haley for her announcement on how the United States will move forward with respect to the UN Human Rights Council.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to thank Secretary Pompeo for his friendship and his partnership and his leadership as we move forward on these issues. 1 year ago, I traveled to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. On that occasion, I outlined the U.S. priorities for advancing human rights, and I declared our intent to remain a part of the Human Rights Council if essential reforms were achieved. These reforms were needed in order to make the Council a serious advocate for human rights. For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Regrettably, it is now clear that our call for reform was not heeded. Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The world's most inhumane regimes continue to escape scrutiny. And the Council continues politicizing and scapegoating of countries with positive human rights records in an attempt to distract from the abusers in their ranks. Therefore, as we said we would do a year ago, if we did not see any progress, the United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. In doing so, I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
As you can clearly see, the United Nations, though honorable in its formation, has become corrupted by the ideologies and politics of the day. Although the United States has not withdrawn from the UN, they have withdrawn from the United Nations Human Rights Council, and we will continue to watch this unfold and break the code. God revealed this to my father going back more than a decade ago, and he continued to see this as an emerging problem. But he also saw that it would come to nothing. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to not only bring the gospel to the entire earth, but to actually protect the innocent people who are trapped, lied to, mistreated, and misled by corrupt leadership. If even the United Nations Human Rights Council has become corrupt, the time for the church to arise has come. This new move of the Spirit that my father, Clement, repeatedly saw is emerging before our very eyes. There is hope. He saw that the youth of the Middle East would rise up against corrupt leadership and ultimately find Jesus as a result. As I've shown you today, God is moving throughout the earth, and he revealed it to his servant, the prophet, my father, Clement. Thank you for joining me for another Code Breakers. As the dots are connecting and so much is going on in the world, I've asked my mother, Jane Clement, to join me today and give us her perspective on all of this. It is my honor to have my mother join us today.
Well, Donna, that was really a beautiful introduction to me.
Thanks.
You are so eloquent.
Thanks, Mom.
And just like your dad, you're just eloquent. And I think that you get that from him. You don't get it from me.
Yes, I do. A little both.
The United Nations Security Council, the United States has removed themselves from the United States Security Council. And you know, in the Old Testament, Zechariah the prophet, he spoke about this very thing. In Zechariah 12, it says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people around about. And when they shall be in siege both against Judah and Jerusalem, and in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." And you know, it's so evident right now in in the United Nations that Israel is picked on and spoken about when there's so many other atrocities going on around the world. This just proves that what Kim prophesied, he's in line with the Old Testament prophet Zechariah. And it's just amazing to me to see what's unfolding in the world right now. The other part of the scripture in Zechariah 12, it shall come to pass in that day, which is talking about the day now that we're living in, that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So it's a dangerous thing to get in the way of God, because God is going to win. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. He is the ultimate winner, the ultimate authority, and he knows exactly what's going on in the world. You know, in Daniel chapter 2, there's the image of the statue, the image of the head of gold, and it goes through all the metals down to the legs of iron, and then it's got the feet of iron and clay. Now you have to remember that those two legs of iron were the Roman Empire in two sides of the world. One was in Constantinople and the other one was in Rome. And so I feel, this is just my little 2 cents, that because there's 2 legs, there's also 2 feet. And on each foot, there's 5 toes and 5 toes. And so we always try and look at they used to say in the old days, the United Nations is the beast that the Revelation is talking about. But actually there's 2 legs and the 2 feet. And so you can see it's the East and the West. And so those nations, just like the United Nations, these nations get together and they form these beasts, really, these empires. And I think that we're going to see a dividing, which is happening right now, because you can see the division between the East and the West, how they're pulling apart. But yet there's still the emphasis of the Roman Empire in both sides. And so somehow I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And so you're getting to hear a little bit about how my mind is thinking. This is actually happening before our eyes. And it's an unbelievable time to be alive, to actually see what's going on in the world right now, especially the moves that President Donald Trump has taken are, you may not like him, it doesn't matter. God put him there, and God's got the whole world in his hands. He knows exactly what's going on. He knew before he created the world what the ultimate plan was. And so for us to think that he's not in control is just not fathomable to me. I think that God knows exactly what he's doing, and it's going to turn out exactly like he wants it to be turning out. And that means that we are going to rule and reign on planet Earth come the millennium reign of Christ. And so we have hope. We are eternal beings, and we will conquer. We will ultimately overcome evil. And that's what it's all about. Overcoming evil with good, let's say. So it's just, that's the bottom line. And we are just living in an unbelievable, unbelievable time. And we can see these prophecies unfolding. And so I just want you all out there to be encouraged and to know that no matter what, just give your heart to God and overcome what comes against you. If you've got sickness or if you've got some kind of problem, addiction or whatever it may be, if you overcome those things or you try to overcome, then you are called an overcomer. And so you are an overcomer, and the overcomer gets the reward. So we don't have to do that much. I mean, God has done so much for us. He's done so much, and all we have to do is accept him. So that ultimately is what we need to do. And so with that, God bless all of you.
Thank you, Mom, for that awesome insight. And thank you to all of you for watching Code Breakers. We love to hear from you. So email us your thoughts and insights at codebreakers@houseofdestiny.org. And remember, you can download our awesome app. Just search House of Destiny, and it's available across all platforms. Now, as you know, my father's life and mission was one of extreme generosity, and he felt called to support the nation of Israel. Codebreakers is only available because of your support. Please consider supporting us as we continue to carry his legacy forward.